Hello everyone, this is 𝙤𝙤𝙝𝙚, Assistant Professor, Department of 𝙤𝙤 Karpagam Academy of Higher Education. So, welcome to our 7th module, that is nitrogen cycle. Hope you all remember our previous modules. The first module is about nature and its resources, and the second module is about air and its pollution. In the third module we have discussed on water and its pollution. And the fourth module I have discussed you about the soil and its pollution, and in the fifth module we come across this biogeochemical cycle, where we have splitted the biogeochemical cycle into the gaseous cycle, and in that we come across carbon cycle, oxygen cycle and nitrogen cycle. So in the previous module we have discussed on carbon cycle, and in this module we are going to discuss about the nitrogen cycle. So, in the previous module I told you that air is nothing but a mixture of composition of gases, that is either carbon, nitrogen or oxygen. And so we all know that 78% of the atmospheric air is composed of nitrogen, right? So that is what I have indicated here, 78% is composed of nitrogen. So this nitrogen is responsible for the development of amino acids and proteins. So what happens, therefore the main component become the DNA and RNA. So I am going to explain about the nitrogen cycle. So we have nitrogen fixing as one part. So how this nitrogen is present in the atmosphere? So nitrogen fixing happens in the first stage, and then generally we used to have a pool, right? So same here, we also have a nitrogen pool in the soil. Followed by a process of denitrification, and by means of this also we can able to get the nitrogen. So the next thing is, this is a common point where we have discussed in all the cycles, that is we used to have plants. Again these plants will be taken as a food by animals, and always we have decomposers, and these decomposers are nothing but the dead plants and the dead animals. So this is a food to the animals, and this will also exert, and this will also exert. And along with this, burning also will release nitrogen. So this will also get exerted. Then what happens? We have a part called ammonia, and this ammonia is obtained from the decomposition particle, and we call this process as ammonification. And by the process we will get nitrogen, and that process we call as nitrification. So this is the entire cycle. Let me clearly explain it in 4 stages. So the first stage is nitrogen fixing. See this diagram. we have a nitrogen pool in the soil, right? So generally this will be happening in all the cycles, and this nitrogen fixing will happen in a stage, and this nitrogen will also be fed to the soil, and when plants inhale, that will also release a nitrogen part, a small amount, and this plants when eaten by animals, this will also, after excretion, respiration, they will exert the nitrogen to the atmosphere, and then when both are get decomposed, that decomposes will produce a part called ammonia, and that ammonia will received by this ammonification process, and this ammonia when get into a process of nitrification, that will also release the nitrogen, and sequentially everything will be fed to this denitrification part where we will get nitrogen in the atmosphere. So in nitrogen fixing we have two types. One is biological nitrogen fixing, and physical nitrogen fixing. So almost all the nitrogen that is available in the world are inert in nature. They have some inherent property, but that will not be utilized, right? So that will be converted into some other form that will be useful for the living organism. That is what happens in case of our nitrogen cycle. Every time we used to convert it into a different parts, what happens? It enters into the atmosphere, and that atmosphere will be absorbed by the soil and the microorganisms that is present in the soil, and that will again feed it back to the atmosphere. This is a repeated cycle. So coming to this biological nitrogen fixing, this will happen by means of a certain bacteria that is present in the soil. It may be present in the soil, or it may be present in the roots, or it may be present in the plant composition. So what happens? This bacteria will lead to the development of nitrites and nitrates. That is why we call it as a nitrogen fixing microorganism. For example, I can give it as rhizobium. And the next part is the physical nitrogen fixing. This happens mainly by means of lightning. So when lightning happens, the earth's temperature and the pressure will get varied. That will release the nitrogen in the atmosphere. So that will mix with the water, and it will get as acids and fell down into the land as a rainfall. So that is what happens in case of my physical nitrogen fixing. So followed by this, we also have industrial fixing. Industrial nitrogen fixing. So when we try to produce nitrogen and rich fertilizers, that will also leads to the release of nitrogen in the atmosphere. So mainly due to physical nitrogen fixing, industrial nitrogen fixing, and biological nitrogen fixing, this cycle will get completed in this part. So coming to the second part, after nitrogen fixing, we have nitrification part. This nitrification is by means of plants and animals. So when plants and animals die, they get decomposed, and the decomposed particle will enter into the soil, and that microorganisms that is present in the soil, they will inhale that nitrogen molecules, and what happens then? They will produce the nitrogen, and the responsible bacteria, we call it as nitrobactum. We call it as nitrobactum. So this is what happens in this part, nitrification part. Next we have nitrification part. In our nitrification part, we have ammonia, and this ammonia will be broken down to produce nitrates and nitrates. This will lead to the production of nitrogen, and that is why this part we call it as nitrification. Example, Plasmodium. So this part is completed. Then coming to the ammonification part, ammonification. See here, As I told you, we have plants, animals, and that decay particles will be taken as a decomposers, and these decomposers is responsible for producing this ammonia, and ammonification process we will get the nitrogen. And the last part is your denitrification part. In case of your denitrification part, the microorganisms that is present in the soil will feel hard to breathe. So this is what we need to remember. They will feel hard to breathe. So what happens? In this part it is broken down into oxygen and nitrogen. So the output will be oxygen and nitrogen. And this splitting up is happened due to the presence of denitrifying bacteria. This bacteria is responsible for splitting into oxygen and nitrogen. And now remember, this oxygen will be inhaled by the microorganisms that is present in the soil, and this nitrogen will be left out. That is the nitrogen that we are receiving in the atmosphere. So this is the final process. So we have 4 stages. We can split this nitrogen cycle into 4 stages. One is the nitrogen fixing part, and next one is ammonification, and the next one is nitrification, and the last one is denitrification. So for this I have told you that rhizomium is one of the example, and for ammonification the example is bacillus, and for nitrification and denitrification we go for Pseudomonas and Claridium. So this is what we have discussed today. So to summing it up, we have discussed about the main part of composition of air is nitrogen and how the nitrogen cycle is operated. So in the next module, we will discuss about the oxygen cycle. With that, we will conclude our 8 modules. Thank you.